welcome back to All Rise. Did you choose to be here today? Or are we forcing you to watch this? Your algorithm may have pointed you to this. Maybe your podcast feed automatically downloaded it, but you've made the choice to listen. So if you don't like it, that's on you. But today we're actually answering the question about free will, determinism, and the miraculous. And I hope you like it. All right, Abdu. So the next question is on free will and miracles. These are two sort of distinct questions. But Humanoid Ty asks, do humans have free will? And why don't we see miraculous things in the world anymore like in the Bible? I think these are two separate things.
Yeah.
He mentioned specifically angels, miracles, visions. So I wanted to start with miracles. We just talked a little bit about, we got a little tiny bit into free will, but we're going to be able to dive into it a little bit more in and of itself. But, one of the first things I thought about when I heard this, why don't we see miraculous things in the world anymore like in the Bible? And some people are seeing miraculous things like they did in the Bible. And of course, you need to be careful. You need to judge these things. But the first thing would be like, who says miracles aren't happening?
Right.
That was kind of the first question I had. And, there is an interesting history to that. The Enlightenment, during the Enlightenment, there were these miracle wars that sort of sparked, in many ways, the Enlightenment, sort of caused some of the skepticism towards religion that was already going on.
Yeah.
And David Hume had a part to play in this too. He had a pretty major part of a major treatise specifically on miracles. And we're not going to go all through the history of David Hume on that, but one day maybe I'll post an article because I did write about that before. But the rejection of miracles happened a lot because of their abuse with like intra-Catholic debates. So there were this group called the Jansenists and this group called the Jesuits. They were essentially having these miracle wars because a miracle means that God is on my side, or else why would this miracle take place? And so there was sort of for authority. There was a certain tomb there in France where a lot of miracles were taking place around, and people started to doubt that. And the problem was all of that led to just a skepticism of all miracles.
Yeah.
Because they're lying about some, potentially all. It would be easier if we just said none of them are real. And this actually eventually led to, down the line a little bit, the theological notion of cessationism, to where now even these sort of charismatic gifts, we're rejecting more and more things that are strange that appear to give people some authority.
Right.
Because they can be abused to get authority.
Yeah.
So it's easier just to say they don't exist. The more,
And that can be even outside of the hierarchy of a church, like a pastor, bishop, all these things that can actually exist within congregants, where you just have to create this like spiritual hierarchy based on your ability to have these gifts.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which, of course, the Apostle Paul himself says, if you have all these gifts, that's great. None of these matter. Love, that's it.
Yeah.
All that stuff matters. So he anticipated the thing before it even happened.
Yeah. Yes. So it's coinciding. What word am I looking for?
Coinciding, I think, is what you're looking for.
For some reason, I totally blanked on that word. I said it, and I was like, that can't be right. So it's coinciding with the rise of modernism, and there's this idea of this ethics of belief that rose up. It's a view of reality where you can only believe things you are justified in believing based on personal experience. This is very David Hume
very
thing. But Hume was very selective in the personal experiences he accepted.
Yeah.
Because the issue with saying miracles don't exist because they violate the laws of nature and they go against uniform human experience.
Right.
Is what is he accepting as uniform human experience when pretty much every culture you can find has some understanding of the miraculous. And Hume is saying no, because I haven't experienced.
Right.
And the people I respect haven't experienced the miraculous.
Right.
Or if they did, they interpreted it as some other thing.
Well, and just I remember a couple of things on that is one, why does it have to be uniform if it needs to be verified? So it doesn't have to be uniform.
Yeah.
Who cares if it's uniform?
Yeah.
Uniformity might help in some ways, but by definition, a miracle isn't necessarily a part of the uniform human experience.
Uncanny events are not uniform.
Right.
But they can happen. Pearl Harbor, not uniform.
Right.
But it really happened.
Definitely happened.
Titanic,
Yeah.
uniform.
So his definition is flawed because it's got to be uniform, but it's also very selective. And I want to just get into this a second because I was at a conference and Craig Keener was speaking, and Craig Keener wrote a multi-volume treatise on miracles and some of the documented miracles as well. Yeah. And he pointed out that what Hume considered to be uniform human experience excluded a huge swath of the human experience from people outside of who he considered to be respectable, but also, and he wasn't calling him a racist necessarily, but he was also saying outside of people he would consider to be enlightened.
Oh yeah.
So
surely, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. These barbarous people in other cultures, in some of those lands that we are taking their resources from, they can't believe they're idiots. But like white Europeans,
we're not as gullible as that.
Yeah, we're the climax of human evolution and cultural evolution.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, so the selectivity had a moral tinge to it, or a taint, I should say, a better word. So, and then Craig Keener says, and by the way, here's a whole bunch of people whose experiences include the miraculous, which are documentable and documented, and really show no reason for them to be lying about these things. As well. And the miracles don't have to be confirmatory of God being on my side. It can be something that, common grace. God causes his rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike, that rain being blessing. So the blessing of a miracle can happen on people who don't even follow him so that they can see how good he is so that they will follow him. Or it can be to confirm what these particular people who follow him are right. That can happen, but it doesn't always have to be that way.
Yeah.
Well, and you've actually sort of framed it in a way in something else, but I like the way you put it, so I'm going to sort of rephrase it my own way, is that, nature itself can birth a miracle once impregnated with God's power to do such a thing. And so Lewis writes that in calling them miracles, we do not mean that they are contradictions or outrages. We mean that left to her own resources, meaning nature's resources, she could never produce them on her own.
Right.
But once impregnated with God's power to produce the miracles, they naturally come.
And it's not unnatural. The pregnancy is not unnatural. It's just a woman left to her own resources couldn't do it.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
It's not out of the ordinary.
Right.
It's not unnatural. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So a miracle is an interference in nature by the supernature, not an intrusion, and it is not God's plan B. And the idea here is it's not as if miracles were God's jury-rigged response to a shoddily built world. This idea that, I didn't make things right, and I got to fix the problem I made. And the miracles are not a Band-Aid on a bad design. They're a feature of the design itself. I think he borrowed from Dorothy Sayers, who talks about an analogy that is similar, and Lewis writes that it is an artistic crime if you simply drag miracles in by the heels to get yourself out of a hole when you're writing a book, for example.
Right.
So if you write a plot and there is, I have this complex plot, but I have to explain this fact, and I explain it by just, a miracle happened.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the horrible thing that was happening, like that one TV show in the 80s, Dallas, where they had to explain how Bobby got shot and then he died, but then he was in someone's bedroom or something like that. And a later episode, it turns out that the whole season was dreamed.
Yeah.
That's just very lazy writing. Yeah. So what he and Dorothy Sayers are saying, it's not like God wrote a bad plot and then needed to plug a hole that he can't figure out how to fix by inserting a miracle. He says, but the unusual event is perfectly permissible if it is what you were really writing about in the first place.
Right.
In other words, the miracle is the plot. It's not the plot filler, it is the plot.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point. So nature is essentially, in one sense, you could say, the non-miraculous parts of nature are not the plot. They're the background information for the plot, which is the miracle. So they're not a violation of the plot. They are the plot itself.
Well, it's interesting too. Even the notion of laws of nature being not miraculous. Laws of nature is a thing that has been sort of stolen from Christian theologians and scientists talking about nature, and there's no reason to think that a law would exist in nature without, again, a lawgiver. But that's for another. Maybe we'll get into that again later. But Yeah, but part of the reason why I think this is a little even dangerous, because we've essentially accepted a view from modernity, from secular modernity and secular humanism, all these secular isms, and the modern world is sort of, miracles are these weird fixes. You can't trust them. There's probably not really happening anymore. But I wonder if part of the reason why we think they're not happening anymore is because we've sort of bought part of that that bill of goods that's been, is that the phrase? That's been sold to us.
Yeah.
And it's an old timey phrase.
That is
in the middle of it. But Peter Harrison, in this book called Some New World, and I finished not long ago, excellent book, kind of goes through the history of even the creation of the terms nature and supernature, why they eventually started, but even that is something that we've sort of accepted, like this very, very strict division between the two that he is saying did not exist before that in the Christian world. And the division created this. Now it's not just a division, but it's one is real and one is not. That's what the division led to.
Yeah.
Supernature is not real, nature is real. But he is talking about the rise in his book in the early modern era. So this is essentially 1500 to the early 1700s or something like that. But it's sort of you're transitioning from the medieval ages to the Enlightenment period and things like that. But here's this middle period leading up to the scientific revolution, all these things. And he's talking about the religious precursors to modernism and secularism. And in the book, he talks about this notion that I had not heard of predictive processing. And he says it's this complex and multifaceted idea, but the central idea is that the content of our perceptions is shaped less by raw sensory inputs than by top-down mental constructs. The latter are based upon predictions of what is most likely to be the case in any observed scenario. So this research, he says, constitutes he calls it this profound reversal in how we typically imagine how the senses interact with the world. He says, in short, our view of the world is to a large degree shaped by prior expectations of what we will perceive. And he gave this example of the gorilla test. So you've probably seen this video. You probably asked to watch this video. He said, you're told to sort of watch this one part of the screen and observe what's going on there.
So you're asked, it's people who are passing a basketball between each other, like 8 people.
Yeah.
And you're asked to count how many times the ball was passed. Yeah.
And what you miss the whole time is that at some point, a fully grown man in a gorilla outfit walks into the video and is doing stuff in the background. And then at the end, you're told what happened and you realize you didn't see the man in the gorilla outfit at all. And he says it's a little like that we've been told, because we're told here's what's important, don't look over here. You actually miss a whole set of things that's going on. So are we really not seeing the miraculous, or are we not expecting it? And so we're missing it.
Yeah.
And
well, that's interesting because you're in that video, and everyone should watch one of these. Now that you've seen it, you heard it explained. Right. You're gonna see the gorilla immediately. But that's okay, because some of the fun is that you didn't see it and now you see it. But your eye actually did catch the light from the screen that showed you this dark figure walking and dancing like a lunatic in between these people who are passing a basketball between each other. And somehow your mind didn't perceive it. That's the point. It was there. Your eye registered it. Your mind didn't perceive it because you didn't expect it to be there. And so oftentimes when we don't see miracles, it's because we didn't expect it, and we're given into this mechanistic view of the world as unenchanted in many ways. We have people have blamed Descartes for this and others as well, and there's some blame there, but there's also a little too much shifted there.
Well, but even that's the idea of you create an understanding of the universe that's mechanical, so all you see is the mechanical. You stop seeing the things that you stop seeing it in ways you did before. So like it limits the imagination. Yeah. And so it limits reality, because perhaps there's actually something real you were seeing there.
This reminds me, I was just this morning watching a video It's an interview with Dr. James Tour out of Rice University, one of the most accomplished chemists, organic chemists, I think, of our age. Talk with Tucker Carlson about origin of life and how do we explain the origin of life, and that we have no scientific explanation for it whatsoever. He's a brilliant man. And for the beginning part of the interview, and everyone should watch this thing, honestly. One is you see this exuberance of this man whose intellect is far above mine, whose accomplishments in his field are far above most. Get excited about the fact that when he knows things, like he knows. Just giving an example of wood. He was saying, you were sitting at this table, it's wood. He says, but I know as an organic chemist why it is that a car made of steel and iron and aluminum and all these things can go 80 miles an hour into a tree and the car will be destroyed, but the tree will stay standing. What it is about wood, and he says there's this material God has created. We didn't create it. God seems to have constructed this material, the durability to withstand fires and withstand winds and withstand cars and all this stuff. We make stuff out of plastic and steel and alloys we have to conjure up together that aren't even as sophisticated as the wood that we happen upon in a forest. And you watch this him talk about this. And it's because of his science and his recognition that the more I know, the less I know. And the more in awe I am, the more he sees the miraculous in the supposed mechanistic world.
Right.
And honestly, if you want to see someone talk about the created order in a breathless way, who knows how it's made, but is still in awe of the mysteries behind it, he sees the miraculous in the things we think are not miraculous at all. He sees it, and it's not because of his ignorance, it's because of his knowledge.
Yeah.
That's remarkable to me.
Yeah.
So go watch that video of James Tour talking to Tucker Carlson. You will be amazed by it.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. And he'd be going up against certain scientists that, again, would be almost victims to this predictive processing issue, because I think even what that research does, now what James Tour shows is that God can free your mind from that. But the research shows that with predictive processing, because you have accepted this certain thing, then the idea of like scientific neutrality is really this sort of naive worldview that you've bought into.
Yeah.
That there is a neutrality, but by the fact of what you're limiting when you go into it, you are limiting what you'll see.
Yeah.
And
well, real quick, it goes into that statement when Richard Lewontin famously said that when we look at these things that appear designed and all these things, we have to like shut the idea out of our minds because we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. That is a worldview taking over the way you see things. We were interviewing Fuzz Rana about microRNA
Right.
and so-called junk DNA. And he told us that during a debate with P.Z. Myers, where he was talking about how junk DNA actually has a function, P.Z. Myers says, I can't buy that because if I do, it upends the Darwinian evolutionary paradigm. It completely upends it. And to which Fuzz said, that's the first time I've ever heard a scientist say that the theory drives the data, not the other way around.
Right.
Because of a understanding, how did he put it? The
predictive processing.
predictive processing.
Yeah.
And we saw it in real time happen there. It happens all the time.
Yeah, and I want to talk about even technology too, because we live in a technological world. We talked about, again, Descartes.
Yeah.
The mechanistic view of the world that we were given and what that did to us. We've talked in previous episodes before. Also, there's one that we did last year, maybe the year before, I don't remember, but on some books we had been reading over the summer. And I mentioned a book by Joseph Minich called Bulwarks of Unbelief.
Great book.
Very good. And he kind of talks about this too, about sort of the way we're viewing the world, the way we're sort of viewing ourselves, the shape of the world, the technoculture that's created can, again, shape our imagination of reality, limit what we see, and enhance certain things that maybe give a distorted view of what we see. But Harrison talked about, so with all that in mind, and eventually I want you to relate this to AI, because it's something you've become, an expert on with sort of thinking through AI from a cultural perspective.
Yeah.
Harrison notes that no technology is neutral. And he quotes Martin Heidegger, the philosopher. Who said technology becomes a distinctive and problematic way of revealing the world. And so Harrison writes, technology restricts our vision of nature and promotes a disturbing tendency to see everything, including our fellow humans, as a resource to be exploited or manipulated. More prosaically, we might say that technology has also blunted our capacity to attend to the miraculous. Marcel Proust remarked in this vein that the telephone was a supernatural instrument before whose miracles we used to stand amazed, and which we now employ without giving it a thought to summon our tailor or to order an ice cream. Along the same lines, Wittgenstein suggested that science has damped down human wonder. And has put us to sleep. You can relate. So there's been a lot of research on social media. A lot of what he just said there is true.
Yeah.
If you look at social media, what it's done to us, how we've used it to manipulate people around us, to hurt people around us, we've become less human, and we seek to dehumanize through social media. It's increased depression, loneliness, social isolation. It's created shrinking attention spans. Rage, radicalization, all these things are enhanced by that. And now I think a lot of that you're going to see maybe going to warp speed with the advent of AI.
Oh, totally.
And maybe the idea, I mean, there's so many avenues you could go down with this. There's so many like threatening paths to walk down with AI. But where do you immediately think to?
Well, yeah, and Harrison gives the example. And by the way, before I even knew Harrison gave this example, I used it in the book I'm writing. Oh, actually, I've written, but it's coming out called Fake ID, which we can talk about in other episodes in the future, about how GPSs and the advent of GPSs have atrophied our ability to be spatially aware of where we are in a given city. So I'll take it from my perspective. I have disclosed this many times, so I'm not ashamed. Well, I'm ashamed, but I'm not worried about saying it yet again. I'm terrible with directions. I'm just horrible with them. I don't know what it is about me. I'm just terrible with directions. I used to be better at it, actually. I wasn't great at it ever, but I was better at it when I used to get lost and I'd have to find my way out of a city, especially when I was younger. I knew where I was. I knew if I was in the south part of the city or if I was east or west of something. I just didn't know, should I take that street or this street, or why is that saying take 75 south when I'm clearly going east? Right. That kind of a thing. And so I triple guess this stuff, and I get in my own head. But I had a sense of whether I was south, north, east, or west, or central in a given city, even if it was a foreign city to me. When GPS became ubiquitous, of course, someone with my inabilities would just trust the machine. And because I didn't have the screen with the arrow moving this way and turning, I had it from a first-person perspective. I always had the left turn or the right turn right in front of me. I didn't know if I was turning west or east or heading north at that particular. I had to look at the compass, and even then it didn't really help. I didn't know where I was in relation to other things. So the technology began to atrophy my ability to know where I was. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. Now apply that on a broader sense with artificial intelligence, where it's blurring our ability to perceive what it means to be human, because here we think of ourselves as these creatures that can create, and part of the expression of our immaterial soul, part of the expression of our immaterial consciousness is the artistry we have, whether it's creating paintings or writing music or whatever it is. And along comes this machine, this clearly soulless thing that can do it as well as we can do or better. I think it actually can't, but because it's taking our stuff and just mimicking it.
Right, yeah.
But
Poorly with 6 fingers or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's not that even when it's done well, a human being was involved in the prompting.
Right. Yeah.
It's not inspired. It won't. They don't sit around. Midjourney doesn't sit around thinking about, boy, that's a beautiful sunset.
Yeah.
I bet you I can capture that. It doesn't.
I
do
want to
that.
give that to others and brighten their day.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't do that.
No.
All that to say is that it starts to change how we view each other. Are we just mechanized things that have just sophisticated algorithms that we haven't figured out yet, but we will eventually, and put them in these machines, and then it'll do this thing for us. We don't require a soul. We don't require an imago Dei to be these things. Well, the reality is based on the research and based on all the information we do have, we do require this stuff to be what we are. But the point is, it changes the way we see ourselves. Technology can do that. And hyper-mechanizing the world and it's losing its enchantment can cause us to not see the miracle that's dancing right in our midst as we pass the ball of knowledge to each other. We really have to focus again, and you'll see it. Does that mean, however, that we're going to see seas parted and brimstone falling from the sky?
Right.
Or these kinds of things? Probably not.
Right.
But those miracles had a purpose in the story. Back to that narrative thing. Why did the sea part? Because it needed to part for this particular reason at this particular time for an important theological and historical matter involving God's redemptive plan.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you're not going to see people healed. I've gone on record and I'll say it. My wife and I experienced a miracle. She had 5 tumors on her liver. And then 3 weeks later, they were not benign. They were gone.
Mm-hmm.
You can try to say,
yeah, you guys were going in for the recheck. Not even like there had been no medication given.
Nothing given.
It was just, we found this. We need a better look at it.
Yep. We had 2 scans,
Yeah.
2 separate kinds of scans that showed from an ultrasound to a CT scan, there were 5 lesions, 5 tumors on her liver. And we were being told by the doctors, here's how we're going to prepare for this. How we're going to prepare for this. We need to get an MRI to find out what kind of tumors they are and where they are so we can find out how to treat this. We got the MRIs done. We walked into the office of the doctor, and the doctor said, I'm going to show you something. And he made a joke about it. Like, do you want the good news or the bad news? I'm like, give me bad news first because the good news will temper me at the end. He says, well, I can't put this game. There's no tumors in there at all. And we asked him for an explanation outside of a miracle. He says, well, look, I can give you some crazy explanation about how in 2 separate tests, the contrast wasn't right. 2 separate times by 2 different labs. But I don't think that's the case. And so my wife asked him, how do you explain this outside of the miraculous hand of God? Her exact words. And he said, I do not discount prayer.
Yeah.
And it was, I can't think of how it could not be a miracle. And I know people who've experienced miracles that are verifiable, that aren't just, I had back pain and I don't have it anymore. I think those can be miracles too, but like verifiable things that have happened.
Yeah.
So if you look for them, you can see them. But if you hyper-technologize the world, or if you hyper-naturalize the world where you expect it to be a certain way, you won't see the things that are right there. And I'm going to back up and say this other thing too. Back to James' tour and the way he sees the world as miraculously made. You are witnessing a miracle by the virtue of the fact that you're looking at the world around you in an intelligible way at all. It's already a miracle, and we're seeing it all the time. Do we need limbs to grow back from amputations? Do we need eyes to grow back in their sockets? Do we need, a thicker head of hair when you pray about it? Great, that may be nice, and that happens. But there's another miracle that you're missing.
Yeah.
If you expect it to, and this is the part of the spiritual part, if you hyper-spiritualize everything, you'll only see miracles that are these grand things. And when you stop seeing them, you might think, was that emotion? Or was it hype? Or am I believing things gullible? And that might cause you to lose your faith. Mm-hmm. Appreciate the subtleties of the miraculous around you, and I think that you'll be in good stead.
Yeah, and I think, in the Bible too, miracles, they tend to have a point to them. It's not just,
right.
Everyone who is sick should be healed.
Right.
To the person who's sick, obviously they feel that way. Mm-hmm. I've had things where I pray, please take this thing away from me. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Interestingly, sometimes it doesn't, and I'm thankful now it didn't, because you grow through those things. That's another thing to keep in mind. Mm-hmm. We can get in our own way with miracles at times, with our own, not just with, again, the technological stuff we've just talked about, but with, perhaps there's in our life something blocking us from being able to experience the thing that God wants for us.
Biblical precedent for that is when Paul says, I asked for this to be removed, but to keep you from becoming conceited, the answer was essentially no. And he learned some really important things through that.
Yeah. And then also James talks about, the prayers of a righteous man availeth much. So there is this understanding that, well, if you're living a life of sin, you might be praying for the wrong things. You also might need to, it's not that you're earning anything, but God can do a lot more through you if you're living faithfully with him, and you're being shaped more by him than trying to get him to be shaped by what you want.
Right.
So we can get in our own ways. But I wanted to mention too, because you just brought up, when Nicole was miraculously healed from those tumors on her liver. And now if Nicole were to write a biography of her life, and let's say, Nicole, you've got 20 pages to do it. You get the highlights. And there might be more than one miracle mentioned in there. There might be salvation mentioned in there. Your salvation would be mentioned in there, which is kind of a miracle if they knew you before you were a Christian.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
And there's all these things. Now, because of that, someone could read that and say, boy, back then miracles happened seemingly once a week. But what's actually going on is she's giving you the highlights, the big moments that shaped the rest of her life, shaped the rest of your guys' life together. And I think what people often miss when they ask this question, miracles aren't happening. Well, you're reading a book, the Bible, collection of books. Not every single one has a miracle in it. And sometimes those miracles, while they seem to be very close together, there's only 200 pages in between them. But that could be many more centuries.
Oh, yeah, between hundreds of years.
So again, be cognizant of when you're reading the scriptures and seeing miracle after miracle after miracle. When is it taking place? Is it, oh man, all these miracles around the life of Jesus? Well, yeah, that Jesus was here, and that is a specific point in time, and there's a specific thing going on. And miracles happen around spreading the gospel. But even, in the Old Testament, these miracles are, again, separated but you're getting the highlights.
Yeah.
You're not getting a people's history of Israel, where you're getting, sort of the everyday life. And here's what happened Monday, Tuesday, because it would look a lot different. The book would be mostly, I went out and tended to crops, tended to the livestock, came home, ate, went to bed, got up the next morning, did the same thing.
Right.
I prayed. That's what you'd be getting.
You got a history of David's life.
Yeah, it would look a lot different.
And you got every single day.
Yeah.
You would definitely be bored.
Yeah, this is before social media, where people put everything they ate every single day.
And you might be thinking, what's the point? And so you have these digests
Yeah.
of their life. And I think that's a point that we really need to marinate on. If you're considering this, is that the Bible has stories of miracles, but it's not a detailed account of every single day of these people's lives. And by the way, one other thing too, some of those miracles were private. They weren't these public spectacles. Some of these things were extremely private. They happened and no one else saw them but the person who's telling you, this is what happened to me. And this is how I'm telling you this is what happened. But I experienced it myself. I'm telling you later, but it wasn't this big thing for 50 people to see.
Yeah.
It didn't always happen that way.
Yeah, exactly. So the point overall, I believe there's still miracles going on. You know people, I know people who've experienced them. But part of it is you have to be open to them and get out of your own way, and also understand that what happens most of the time is not miracle after. I mean, you couldn't even stand a life like that.
Yeah.
But
and it wouldn't be how could you do history? How could you do science?
Right.
How could you do these things?
Yeah.
Every single moment of your life was filled with some kind of a crazy miracle.
Yeah. And God is entrusting us to be his ambassadors, not to have to interfere at every moment, but he's given us the ability to go out as his sort of, I always blank on the most simplest words. I find it so frustrating. But anyway, I already said ambassadors. We'll just keep it with that.
Yeah.
But so
Adversaries?
No, it was even simpler than that. I know it's a very common
Representatives?
There we go. See, that's all I was looking for.
You went to
right in the middle. This is why I'm not a speaker.
Oh, wow.
And you are.
There's times when I wish I wasn't either.
Yeah, but I have to stop and complain about it. You probably would just move on for the sake of.
Yeah. Hey, we'll get back to the show in just a second, but right now I wanted to tell you about my new book, Fake ID: How AI and Identity Ideology Are Collapsing Reality and What to Do About It. To tell you about the book, here's a short trailer. Something is deeply wrong, and we can all feel it. Culture tells us we're nothing but machines. It also tells us we're gods who can reshape reality by sheer will. Both can't be true, so it creates a kind of cultural schizophrenia where we can no longer tell what's authentic from what's artificial, and it's collapsing reality itself. But we're not machines to upgrade. We're not gods whose bodies are playthings or prisons. What we are is something the world is forgetting, but desperately needs to remember. Because only the truth about what we are can restore our sense of what's real. Okay, let's get back to the show.
So, but the other thing they asked about was just free will in general. They didn't combine the two. Of course, they could have combined the two and asked about that, but and there's an answer to that. But they specifically asked about free will, and so we want to discuss there are issues with the notion of free will in a fallen world. We've already talked about the fall and sin and what's going on with that, and that kind of directly plays into the issue of free will. So, essentially, we are born into a sinful world full of bad habits and modes of thought that are not only already are our wills kind of bent, but these things are poured onto us essentially by the time we're born. We're born into a bad system, a fallen system. So before we can even think for ourselves, we're being taught how to think with flawed ways of thinking, flawed ways of feeling, flawed ways of treating each other. Like I said, we have these impulses within us we're not aware of. And even then, our moods can be dictated by weather, by food, by our biology, by our past, our perceived future, what happened that day.
Whether we're sick, all kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so we tend to view it in, this idea of you grow increasingly blind the longer you stay away from Jesus, so that it gets worse. The older you get, you're sort of more innocent. The younger you are, you're open to more things, and you can sort of get more and more of a heart of stone as you continue to grow. And so we're sort of, this idea of you have this like irregular heartbeat in a sense. You're walking around with this irregular heartbeat at all times. And so with that then, does everyone even have the ability to respond to God, given everything that's stacked against us?
Yeah. Well,
so are we free?
Yeah. Well, and we're talking about it in a moral and a spiritual sense. I mean, the broader sense of, and I'll get to that in a second, but even the broader sense of, do we have free will as human beings? Does free will exist, or is it an illusion? It's funny because Sam Harris wrote a book called Free Will where he argues we don't have it, which is interesting because he argues that, which suggests that he looked at the data, made a rational inference from that data, and then told us about it. But it's somewhere along the lines he had to rationally make a decision about what he considered to be good data and bad data. If we don't have free will, then his book is nonsense because he didn't choose to write it. He just did what his genes and the chemical things having in his brain told him to do and made him do. So I think that we actually do have free will in a real sense. In fact, if we're asking the question and we expect a meaningful answer, then you automatically have free will because not automatically, but then it implies you have free will because if you take the answer and say, I agree or disagree, you're either doing that based on your biochemistry or you're doing it because you find it to be true.
Yeah.
And if you can't find it to be true outside of your biochemistry, then you don't have free will. You might as well even ask the question. You're a complete determinist. But we're talking here in a more spiritual sense about whether, given our condition, do we have the ability to respond to God? And there are some scripture verses that I think are important here. Look at John chapter 1, verse 9. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. And in Titus chapter 2, verse 11, there's this discussion of grace for all for salvation. For the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. So there's an offering to all people. So the light comes into the world, and the offer is to all people. if the offer is to all people, then it at least implies heavily that the offer has the ability to be accepted
Right.
by all people. Whether it is accepted by all people is another issue, but it has the ability to be offered and therefore accepted by all people. Otherwise, the offer seems a little silly.
Right.
And we already talked about some of these scriptures in a previous discussion about, Jesus, when he's lifted up on that cross, he will draw all people to himself, etc. So there are some suggestions that people can respond and have the free will to respond to the message of salvation. Now, one other thing I want to say about this is that from a Calvinist perspective and an Arminian perspective, both respect the idea of free will and both respect the idea of God's sovereignty. So a Calvinist might say something similar to this, and I don't want to oversimplify it, but for purposes of time, is that if free will is the ability to do what you want is to reject God, and so you will do the thing you want.
Right.
Such that if God changes your ability or your desire so that you choose him, you do what you want. So that is, in a sense, free will, even from their perspective. I think that is a little different than an Armenian might look at it and say, well, free will is the ability to choose something other than the choice you want someone to make. So I think that there's a bit of a mystery there, but both views would say that people are doing what they want to do. And so if free will is the ability to do what you want, then both would say that we actually do have the ability to respond to God. It depends on what is the impetus for that ability to choose.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, there's tons of passages we could go through showing
God blinds
free will. Right.
to the truth sometimes. He gives them over. He doesn't blind them in terms of it. God keeps them from seeing the truth, but God gives them over to the depravity of their minds and gives them over to a strong delusion.
Right.
This is something that you said earlier. You go away from God to a certain point to where you're no longer seeing him. Not because he doesn't want to be seen, but because he gives you the respect to be able to walk away.
Yeah.
And now you have completely gone out of the line of sight of God. You can return, and he can return to you if you want, but he's going to respect that.
Yeah. Yeah. And even though he is, he is clearly sovereign, omniscient.
Yes.
There's all those texts as well. There are just all of these things so even when something bad happens, it's not like in the scriptures, it's always like God ordained this because no one had any choice in the matter. The parable of the weeds essentially ends with Jesus, or the figure there looking at the weeds among the tares and saying that, the wheat and the tares, saying, oh, look, he says, an enemy has done this. An enemy has done this. These sort of figures rising up in the church that are, an enemy has done this. It's not that God is doing this. And Paul talked about the God of this age, the devil, blinding people also, but that we can give into that. We can stop resisting the devil. We can start resisting God. That there is this level in which God is in charge. There's even the sort of the classic example of, Paul writes in Philippians 2, therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and act in order to fulfill his good purpose. So there is in some sense both going on, that God is willing and acting in you, and yet you have to cooperate, participate in that willing and acting. It's like what we talked about before, the archer. God is there, but you can rip yourself away if you don't want to go God's way. He won't force you, but he will guide you very well if you let him.
And this goes into something that, I'm not dogmatic on this, but it does appeal to me as a way to sort of not resolve, but approximate a resolution of God's sovereignty and human free will when it comes to the salvation question, is this idea of Molinism and middle knowledge. Is that the idea, and this is going to be a simplified version of this, that God knows what you will do and he knows what you would do. So it's important to understand the distinction here. God knows what you will do, and that God has perfect knowledge of the future. He knows it's true that you will do this thing. But God knows that if these circumstances pertain based on his knowledge of you and his perfect knowledge of counterfactuals, he knows that if this were the circumstances, you would do this thing of your own free will. So in his sovereignty, if he wants this outcome to happen, he can manipulate the world such that these circumstances will arise so that when they happen, you will freely choose to do this thing he wants you to do. He didn't make you do it in a directive will kind of a way. It was more of a hybrid between his directive will and his permissive will. It was his will that you do this of your own free will, and he makes it so that you will choose that of your own free will. And you could have chosen another way, but because your free will, he knows what you would do. So the analogy I've given before is, and I want to modify it slightly, is, let's say, you and I are roommates, and you're training for something. You're training for a marathon, and you happen to have a raging sweet tooth. Why are you smiling?
Well, one of those things is true.
You have a raging sweet tooth? I do too. But let's say I went to a restaurant before that gave you one of these ridiculous chocolate cakes.
Decadent.
Yeah, the death by chocolate or whatever it is. Yeah. And I couldn't eat the whole thing, and I sliced it in half, and I put a piece of it in the freezer. It's an ice cream cake that's like, oh my goodness, come on. And you know that. And I saved it. I don't really care if I eat it or not. And you come in from training, and I know that if you see it on the table, you'll probably eat it. So it's in the freezer, and you struggle, and you struggle, and you struggle. And you're, should I eat it? Should I not? Should I eat it? Should I not? And you decide not to. You take a shower, you go to bed. You've overcome the temptation. Little did you know, I actually threw it away. You couldn't have possibly eaten it if you wanted to.
Right.
But you freely chose not to eat it. Just because you couldn't have eaten it doesn't mean you didn't freely choose to not eat it. You freely chose not to eat it. No one made you not open the refrigerator, but you couldn't have done it even if you wanted to.
Right.
So my sovereignty over the chocolate cake in that instance was exercised, and your free will in that moment was still exercised. Just because God is sovereign doesn't mean we don't have free will. And you see this in the parable of the generous employer in Matthew chapter 20, is that the generous employer goes and he sees various workers out in the field, and he hires the first guys and says they negotiate, and he pays them a denarius for the day's labor. But he hires day laborers with only an hour left of work, and he pays them the same amount of money he was going to pay the first guys for only 1 hour of work. So the first guys worked the whole day for a denarius. The last guys worked 1 hour of work for the whole day, 1 hour of work the whole day, and got paid the denarius. So they got paid equal for far less work. And the first guys see it, and they're mad, and they say, hey, you owe us more money. And the master of the vineyard, who is God in the parable, says, friend, I have done you no wrong. Can't I do with my money what I want? It's God's sovereignty. And didn't you negotiate for 1 denarius? Human free will. So they negotiated in this whole thing, but in God in his sovereignty sees all this. Yeah. And the plan is being worked. So I do think that human beings have free will. But I also think that God is sovereign. And though the dance of the mystery there sometimes escapes us, but logically speaking, they can both coexist.
Right. Yeah. And we also, I kind of mentioned, or we kind of talked about it earlier with the idea of sin, and in individual instances of sin, you have the ability to sin or not sin. And just like you talked about with the chocolate cake, there's even that notion of there's free will, but there's also free won't. Like, I don't know if I don't know if I can do anything I choose to. And I know there have been times when I have chosen not to do something that every impulse within me was screaming to do. Like if you go to bed without eating the chocolate cake, you want it, and obviously, it's because you have this other goal.
Yeah.
But it's still, you are resisting.
Yeah.
You are choosing to go against something that you want.
Yeah.
And when it's hard to do. So there's that notion as well. But I wanted to ask, just to because I think you answered that really well. I wanted to ask, just to wrap up this question, because sometimes you'll hear it a follow-up is, okay, so you can have free will, but sometimes when people talk about free will, they'll say, but with free will comes risk. That's why sin exists. That's why evil exists, because God gave us free will. And so he's not to blame. We're to blame. And so they'll say, but is there going to be free will in heaven? I say, yes, there will be. Okay. But if there's free will in heaven, will we be able to sin? Well, no. Okay, so God could have created a place where we could exist freely without sinning, and for some reason chose not to this time, even though how painful this existence is. So what would you say to, and where do we start to look at that that notion? Because what's different? If he can create heaven, why didn't he do that in the first place? Now, this is a why question.
Yeah.
So that gets into some of the difficulties.
So the why would God question.
Yeah. Yeah, but what sort of...
Well, I do want to start with that because I often repeat it, but it's often necessary to repeat it. And it doesn't delegitimize the why would God questions. We need to have the why would God questions. I don't think that what I'm going to say next delegitimizes that, but I just want to make sure we enter into it with caution. When you ask a why would God question, you are asking finite human beings to crawl inside the mind of the infinite and pull out the needle in the haystack of the infinite. And so I want to be very careful about this, that I don't give a conclusion I think is like, this is the answer.
Yeah.
This is a bit of an it seems to me answer, but that it seems to me is based on not only scripture, but also some measures of logic and theology and these kind of things. First is that my understanding is that when you have a world with imperfect creatures and you have a world where you're going to have love, genuine, actual love, there's going to be the possibility of rejection, because love that is coerced, love that is forced, is the kind of thing that isn't really love at all. And so if you have a progression where you have a world like ours, an imperfect world of free creatures where there's going to be the possibility of rejection, that leads to a culmination of true love. And heaven is the sealing off of, you are no longer going to go back against the thing that you have chosen through the interaction of human free will and God's sovereignty to love him. And so however that comes about, and God in his sovereignty knows that these circumstances will cause this thing to happen where you will have this freely chosen love or freely given love to him, that heaven is the point where it's sealed now. Who you are is sealed. That's also, the converse is true, is that when you have a world where love is capable, but also that entails a necessary rejection of the one who is asking you to love him, that is a point where it's sealed too. You've chosen over the course of your life and the vagaries of life, ups and downs, to reject. And there's a point where that's sealed too. And so you are now getting what you want. And what you want is either God's will to be done in terms of embracing him, or God's will to be done, or your will to be done, which is to reject him, and God will respect it. And so those are the sealing. So we are in a world where love is possible and free will is possible. And then that which you want to do is now sealed in heaven. And so that there will be growth. I think there will be personal growth in heaven. It'll be a world where there'll be free will, but you will now do the thing you want to do.
Right.
And what you want to do is explore and love and be in relationship with the infinite God, who you, through the various struggles of life, have now had that love sealed. And the counter is true too when you're in an eternal absence of God's direct love, because you've chosen that. You'll be in a free will state in one sense to live out that life that you chose for yourself. That's the whole parable of Lazarus and the rich man. Lazarus goes to Abraham's bosom and he lives in this world where it's free. And how do I know that? Because Lazarus asks Abraham, the rich man asks Abraham, send Lazarus to cool my tongue or warn my brothers, suggesting that there is a command, sort of like there's a ability to respond to people's requests, but there's also limitations. Lazarus couldn't go and cross over the chasm. But also this limitation is that the rich man never repents of his sin. He never does that. He still treats Lazarus like a slave the whole time, even though he knows Lazarus is in heaven. So there's a sealing that happens. I mean sealing in the terms of like making something watertight.
Right.
So you become who you were going to be through this world. So is there free will in heaven? I think the answer is yes, in the sense that you can do what you want to do. And now what you want to do is love God as a result of the things that you went through in this imperfect world. So I don't think, maybe it's not feasible for God to create a world where you will genuinely love him for eternity if everything was perfect.
Right.
We have to go through this first to get to that. But that would be fake and inauthentic if we didn't have this first.
Yeah.
That's a possibility.
Yeah. Okay. And then what stops? I guess one of the questions would be, people might hear about growth in heaven. Why would I need to grow if I'm made perfect, or if I am perfect or complete in some way? But it's interesting because even Jesus, who was perfect and sinless, when he is incarnated on earth, talks about him growing in wisdom and stature.
Right.
And how does the perfect have to do that? So I wonder if that's even at all analogous.
Yeah, and I think there's something important there because Jesus in his divine is perfect. And of course, there's a whole thing about the incarnation and Jesus being human, but not merely human. You and I are merely human. He is perfectly human.
Yeah.
And
that's what we're trying to become.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But perfectly human doesn't mean perfect in the sense that God is perfect. I know that the Bible says, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect and all that stuff, but it's talking about moral righteousness. So perfection is something you can attain to and you can grow in heaven. First of all, grow in knowledge, even by just in the knowledge area. We're not going to have infinite knowledge the minute we get to heaven. Thank goodness we're not going to, because as beings who recognize the temporal, and we're going to have everlasting life, but we won't be eternal. Eternal isn't the same thing. Eternal life, we talk about that, but what we really mean is it will have a beginning and will never have an end. Like a ray versus a line. In geometry, a line has no beginning and no end. A ray has a point and it begins and it goes out to infinity. God is the line, we are the ray. So we'll have eternal life in the sense that it'll never end, but we have a beginning. There was a point in which we didn't exist. My point here is that we, as beings that will grow in our knowledge, will explore for infinity the infinite God. We will never exhaust who God is, no matter how much time and resources we have. They'll never get exhausted themselves. So there'll be this wonderful sense of growth in knowledge and in understanding who God is and awe and these kind of things. But we won't, make missteps. We won't look at the wrong thing and all that. Part of it's because the world around us won't have those temptations.
Right.
We won't be given those things. And this goes back to something of this idea of the free will versus the freed will. And this is not an idea that I've come up with, of course, but there's this idea of the free will to do this good and this bad, but the freed will, which is to always do that which is good.
To do that which you were created.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that freed will happens after going through a state of free will where you can do the wrong things and you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's go into, we got a couple rapid fire. I'm sure
All right, let's do the rapid fire.
Our listeners, probably their brains have been fried potentially by this. There's a lot of Bible, a lot of stuff going on. But first, Jacqueline 5920 asks, Christian parents, or she says, Christian parents are being shunned in droves by children. What does the Bible mean by the hearts of children will turn back to the fathers in Malachi 4:6?
This is similar to me to train a child in the way he'll go, and when he grows older, he will not turn from it. That is not an axiom. That is a guideline. Because there are plenty of children who you train in the way they should go, and then when they're older, they do, in fact, turn from it. We see that in the Bible. We see that in David's own children. We see that in Solomon's family. We see that in Solomon, for heaven's sake, who wrote that. So it's not a rule. And in Malachi 4:6, this is a bit of a prophecy as well. This is a prophecy. This is not like you and your kids in your family situation. This is a broader prophecy about what God's going to be doing in the world. So don't apply a broad prophecy to your specific situation and expect it to be axiomatically true. It's a guideline. So it tends to be the case that when you train a child in the way he or she should go, that it is more likely than not, and it tends to be the way that when they're older, after they've gone through a bunch of junk in their life, they will realize the wisdom of it and come back and turn and not turn from it, but also their hearts will come back to the fathers and the mothers as well. I want to say this, though, very carefully as a parent and as someone's child. I know the pain. I don't want to assume that this question is asked academically.
Right.
I want to assume the other. I want to assume that this question is asked because there is something going on or has gone on where there's a prodigal and someone has turned away and someone seems extremely far from God or rejects the parents and hates them now. There's a lot of listening that needs to happen because sometimes we as parents can have shortcomings and we might have done something. Other times we didn't do anything and we just don't understand the situation or the things that our children are going through. So it's listening, it's praying for wisdom at that moment. How can I be an agent that turns the hearts of the children back to the fathers and the mothers? How can I be an agent and find other people who might be able to help as well to bring that child back in the way they should go when they were trained as a child so that they won't turn from it anymore. But there is that story of the prodigal son, and I know that story is multi-layered, multifaceted. But the reality is the Bible says that, look, you got to have a really great father. And in that parable, by the way, the father is God. You can't have a better father than God. And a prodigal runs away and turns away, but comes to his or her senses at some point. I can't guarantee that's the result every time. But what I can say is that you can act toward the prodigal the way the father acted toward the prodigal, where you see that prodigal far off, and even if they show a glimmer of wanting to come back to the way that they were taught, you run to them, throw your robe around them, put the ring on them, and celebrate. Because what was once lost is now found. So no, it's not a axiom, but it is a guideline that not only is for our children, but for us as parents, as to how can we actually be someone they want to turn back to.
Yeah, that's I found that's the key too. That just brought to mind so many examples I've heard of both versions of this, where one version is, and again, we don't know what's behind the questioner here, but one version is that perhaps as a parent you did do something that negatively impacted them, even if you meant it for good, and now in hindsight, it's sort of, well, maybe that wasn't good. Maybe this, I joined a cult and I thought it'd be a great cult for my child, and it turns out it wasn't a good cult. That sort of a thing.
Yeah.
That, at the time you may have even thought this will be helpful for them. You have to have the openness and the humility to accept that without getting defensive. And that's one of the major things I've seen a lot in some of these instances, where they just immediately get defensive, and they may be the child may be justified saying, you did this, and I need you to acknowledge it. I want to talk to you about it. And for whatever reason, the parents just can't go there, or their ego gets into it, and they, now they feel very attacked and they get very sensitive about it. But you have to be open to that. I've heard so many great stories of a parent who heard what their child said and just thought about it and came back and just admitted, said, you know what, you're right. And it was so healing. Now, maybe it's a situation where they can't do that. And on the flip side of that, I've also heard of situations where there are children who have grown up and eventually have to become the parents, because maybe your parents can't go there for whatever reason. It's not going through, and you have to decide, again, depending on the heinousness of what happened,
Right.
you have to decide, or maybe they can't go there and I'm asking them to do something they can't. And so maybe you're being asked to try to forgive or be a healing presence in that situation, that there's just something, for whatever reason. We grow up today, I feel like, in an environment where we are not only taught how to be, but allowed to be more have a higher emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and maybe we're taught to work through our traumas, not to work to avoid our traumas.
Yeah.
Things like that. So there's just a lot of of layers to this.
Yeah.
I feel like that are
Yeah.
important to keep in mind.
But don't be disappointed.
But overall,
it doesn't work out axiomatically.
right.
Don't be disappointed because it's not meant to be an axiom. It's meant to be a guideline that can get results on average, but doesn't guarantee them.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last question then was on conversion. This is from DNS 9833. And this is I don't remember if I mentioned this on the show before or not, but we had a video of ours that kind of blew up where you had a dialogue with a Hindu.
Mm-hmm.
And we got a lot of comments like this one.
From Hindus.
From Hindus. And I'm wondering if this person came to us through that video, because this is almost like you could copy and paste this, but in the way they talk about it too, was often this Abrahamic faiths, that.
Yeah.
And so they ask, why do Abrahamic faiths need to convert people? Why can't people live with their belief and be accepted as they are, essentially?
So a couple of things. One is I do think this is from someone outside of an Abrahamic monotheism, which is Judaism, Christianity, Islam. And, that's irrespective of whether or not Abrahamic faith is a great way to put Islam or not. But let's assume it is. The first thing I want to recognize is Jews are not all that interested in converting people.
Right.
Just so you know, you run into Jews, they're not big on getting converts. They like them when they happen. I mean, Sammy Davis Jr. being the most obvious example of it, but there's plenty of people who convert to Judaism, but it's not a evangelistic group. It's not.
Right.
For a number of reasons. But Islam and Christianity are. And here's why. They both believe that what they believe is true, and what happens to you after you die depends on whether you agree with them. Mm-hmm. Now, I want you to think about it. This goes back to a Penn and Teller. I think it was Penn Jillette, who's an atheist, said after one of his shows, a guy who's a Christian who loved his comedy and loved his magic, his illusions, came up to him and gave him a Bible and said, I think your show's great. I think you're terrific. I love your comedy. I love your humor. But I really believe in this book, and I really think that you need Jesus because I want you in heaven. I'm summarizing what he said, basically. But Penn Jillette said, I think that guy's deluded, but I appreciate his sincerity. How much do you have to hate a person to believe that they might go to hell if they don't believe that Jesus is their Savior, and then not tell them about it? Mm-hmm. How much do you have to hate a person? So in Abrahamic faith, let's just take Christianity. I can speak from that. I can speak from both Christianity and Islam. But let me just take Christianity specifically. If I believe fundamentally that all of us have sinned, and there's no way you don't believe that you've done something wrong, you've accreted at least some bad karma. If I believe fundamentally that you need Jesus to pay, and you need to accept that he's paid the price for you on the cross, and if you don't accept that, then you'll pay your own price, and that means hell. I want to convert you not because I need to have you in the club. I don't care if you call yourself a Christian. I don't care if you say, I'm in the club and this is the name of the club I'm in. I couldn't care less about that. What I care about is your salvation. I deeply believe you're made in God's image and you are of infinite value. And while I might not know a person, I am required to love that person enough to tell them that this is where their ultimate destiny lies. Now, I want to put the shoe on the other foot for a moment, because during my dialogue with the Hindu, with Fred Stella, the issue of all roads lead to heaven kind of came up. And he's Advaita Vedanta Hindu, so he does believe that he is essentially divine, and that part of the moksha, the release from the cycle of death and rebirth, and the attainment of enlightenment and becoming one with the Brahman, is for the Atman, the self, to realize its divinity. That is a central core of his belief as a Hindu. And that once you realize that, then you stop becoming reincarnated and you escape the life, the samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth. And I asked him, I said, I, as a Christian, believe that believing you're divine is the cardinal sin. That is the thing that keeps you from God. You're saying that you believe you are God. If I die in this life believing that it is a sin to believe that I'm God, I will not be enlightened. And for every life I have where I do not believe that I am God, I will be condemned or destined to return, maybe even in a lower life form because of my bad karma.
Yeah.
So you don't believe that I will ever achieve enlightenment until I believe what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
So you're proselytizing too. We're all proselytizing. And at some point you believe I'll become enlightened, but I'll only become enlightened when someone tells me this is true and I believe it.
Yeah.
So it all requires conversion. It all requires that. So let's put away this notion that even the inclusive religions like Hinduism believe that you don't need to convert people. I will never attain the enlightenment you think I need to attain, the moksha, the release, unless I believe what you believe, if you're a Advaita Vedanta. So let's put away this idea, this illusion that we're not trying to convert people. We definitely are.
Yeah.
But the Christian is just obvious about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good thing. I want you to try to convert me. Please, try. I want to exchange in these ideas. And I hope you'll be open-minded enough to see that maybe the Christian faith is actually worth believing.
Yeah. Great. Well, that's it. What a marathon.
That was a marathon.
What a marathon.
Yeah.
We've done hours of answering questions now. And I'm looking forward to getting back to apologetics.
Yeah.
People tend to ask like, I found that when you ask for questions like this, they want to know kind of theological beliefs and stuff.
Oh, that's true.
And it's interesting because there's always this, we tend to try to not take like dogmatic stances on things that we know there's disagreements on within the community.
Yeah.
So it's interesting when these come up and you're trying to, well, let me explain this. And okay, this group says this group says
Yeah.
that. So it takes a little longer and you're trying to,
Right.
But we got there. We made it. Hopefully people were helped through that and saw the just the beauty of the scriptural narrative and what it has to impart to us with its wisdom. And essentially, you said it before with what Paul said, love, love,
Yep.
love, humility,
Online.
all those things. But with all of that said, Abdu, do you have any closing arguments for us?
Well, no closing arguments particularly, except for a closing statement that I would say is that, first of all, these questions are great questions, no matter whether they were why would God questions or theological questions or questions about conversion or the issue of free will. I think the important thing is to keep asking these questions, is to keep exploring the answers, but not to make questions the goal. Questions are a tool by which we actually come to answers. Answers are, in fact, the goal. Not perfect answers, not comprehensive answers, but sufficient answers so that we can come to a confidence that what we believe actually has a basis. There's going to be peripheral questions we're not going to know the answers to, but that doesn't mean you should stop asking questions or stop resting in the answers you already have. It simply means that there is a wonderful world full of questions and an infinite number of answers that we have yet to explore. So the fact that we don't have all the answers should actually encourage you, because it means we're going to explore these kind of wonderful things for those who are in Christ for eternity. So keep asking the questions, keep seeking the answers, but make the answers the point, not the questions.